Danley. On tonight's program, we have the master of manliness.
Yeah.
Stephen Mansfield will be coming on tonight's program. New York Times bestselling author, world-renowned speaker, journalist that was embedded in the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. I'm sure we'll get some time to talk to him about that, though. What he's primarily promoting tonight, on top of the fact that he is a renowned political and religious commentator, is his new book, Men on Fire. Mm-hmm. Men on Fire is a book that is specifically about...
It's about Ghostwriter.
It's I don't think that it is. However,
Guy on fire, Ghostwriter on fire, motorcycle on fire. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. What was it? Bones on fire and a motorcycle on fire with chains on fire from hell. That was Ghostwriter.
Men on Fire.
Yeah, Men on Fire, which is not about spontaneous combustion, but rather it is about the necessity of the modern man to be on fire for God and in pursuing manhood, which I think is a really, it's a very interesting topic for a book. Now, he's got 2 podcasts out, both the Stephen Mansfield podcast and the Great Man podcast, and the words great man are smashed into one word.
It's like a title, right? Like
it is.
It's like Florida Man. It's not talking about a guy from Florida, right? It's not in general people from Florida.
Right, yeah.
It's Florida Man did something. Great Man. This is what great man is. Yeah,
and I had a really hard time finding the podcast because of that. Yeah. I was actually looking for it for, not to make myself sound too dumb here, but I was looking for it for about 6 months, 7 months, looking for the podcast. And I would type in like The Great Man Podcast, and it didn't exist there, and Great Man Podcast, and it wasn't there. But when you smush them up as one word, lo and behold, there it is.
They make a podcast, baby.
Yeah, they do. They get it all there.
We can cut that.
Yeah. There's a lot of this that's going to get cut. Let's take a look at the actual press release. It says, "Living as a noble man in a confused culture." Mm-hmm. What does it mean to be a man? Our culture offers many examples of men, from those who are successful and at work, regardless of the toll it takes on the rest of life, to the bumbling, clueless father of the disengaged youth caught up in technology. In his new book, Men on Fire, restoring the forces that forge noble manhood. That's some serious subtext.
Yeah.
New York Times bestselling author and cultural commentator Stephen Mansfield argues that men were made for so much more than they are being shown. It's time to reignite the 7 fires that ought to burn in a man's soul: heritage, battle, destiny, friendship, love, legacy, and God. Well,
very cool.
We were talking about, I want to know what these 7 fires are. They're listed.
I'm going to predict the future and say that this is a great episode, and Stephen Mansfield is super awesome.
I hope so. He's somebody who...
If not, we'll just cut this.
Yeah, he's somebody who I've admired for a really long time.
Cut this too.
Yeah, boom. Later, Stevesy.
No, I also really like this book, the Mansfield's book of manly men.
What do you like the most about it?
It's yellow.
Yeah,
and it's got a really cool mustache guy on the front.
So I will tell you,
I want to read it. I have not.
While you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, this one looks cool. An utterly invigorating guide to being your most masculine self.
There's a reason why I grabbed that book, and it has to do with the fact that it was yellow. That
it looks like that guy.
Yeah, there was a Jack Johnson looking character on the front of it, but also
how about you?
The fact that he was a New York Times bestselling author and he was in a Christian bookstore. I felt like those two things were...
That was a mistake. There's a mistake somewhere.
Exactly. I was like, all right, well, if this is...
There's Dave Ramsey and there's other ones.
Okay, but those guys are very niche, right? This is a guy who wrote a book about manliness and is also... Because normally the guys that write the books about like manliness, manhood restored, or all this other stuff, they're guys that aren't even known within Christian circles. Mm-hmm. That other Christians are like, well, who is this
also,
guy?
It's
Why
not
is he telling me about a man? Right.
It's not very cool to say masculinity in a positive way.
Right. And the exception of that, I think, is John Eldredge, who wrote
Know him well.
Wild at Heart.
Know him well.
Do you?
No.
No, yeah. So John Eldredge wrote Wild at Heart. John Eldredge. He's got
from Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah,
great
certainly.
Movie.
Great name.
Yeah, that is a cool name.
That is a great
It's
name.
almost as cool as John Elway.
The football player?
Yeah, it's a cool name. And we can cut this too.
We did say we were just doing this to warm up.
No, I'm just playing. This is our show. Okay, at this point,
this is true.
It's me trying to derail you, and I mean, how many times I've said this. You're looking very snazzy in your suit.
Oh, thank you.
Reading a press release.
Yep.
And I'm talking about whatever I'm talking about. I'm not sure. I checked out a little while ago. I'm just getting warmed up. Smash that like button.
Smash your nose.
If you want to get notifications, smash the like. You can't just click the like and subscribe button. You got to smash it. I want you to take your remote control and get a hammer and just smash it. Do you see that Stephen Mansfield is entering the waiting room?
No.
Okay. I was waiting.
In that case, then I'm ready if y'all are.
Yeah. Let's go.
Sweet. Hey guys, welcome back to the Reverend and the Reprobate. Myself and Danny are here. We are just honored to be joined by the manliest of men himself, Mr. Stephen Mansfield, a New York Times best-selling author of The Faith of George W. Bush. I'm most familiar with him because of Mansfield's book of Manly Men and also his book Killing Jesus. He has written a new book called Men on Fire, which is part of a trio that speaks directly about manhood with Mansfield's book of Manly Men, Building Your Band of Brothers, and Men on Fire. And so I want to start with asking you some questions about Men on Fire, how you got inspired for the book, but really, as a pastor, the question that I have that is probably the overarching theme, it seems, of all of these is how your relationship with God, how your faith influences what you feel like or what you see manliness as.
It's a great question. Let me just tell you quickly that I had written Mansfield's book of Manly Men and also a little book I call a movement book, a book we basically sell at our events and try to feed a movement with, called Building Your Band of Brothers. And before COVID, of course, I was speaking at men's events all over the world, but there was something I was unhappy about. There was something I noticed was missing. And men who were in men's ministries, men who were in men's movements and reading books and growing, good things were happening, but there was some kind of inner passion, force, get up and take it kind of thing in individual souls that I just found missing. And so I started giving thought to what that was. I knew it was personal. I knew it was individual with each man. And that's how I came up with the 7 fires in Men on Fire. They are intensely personal. They have to do with your family, your heart, your love, your relationship with God, your friendship, the legacy you're going to leave. And so it's not just men in general and men countering the forces of this age and what have you, but it really is intensely personal. So that's why I wrote the book. And I'll tell you what, my faith helps me understand manhood, first of all, as something that is created by God. And that may sound simple, but of course, in our generation, especially in the universities that are criticizing manhood and masculinity so much, their assumption is that manliness, masculinity, is a social construct, that it evolved and was created by men for domination over the rest of the world, over women especially. And so that this is not something created by God. Now, certainly I believe there's toxic masculinity, and certainly I believe there's perversions of what true manhood is. But I start with the assumption that God made men, and many of the things that are characteristic of men are fashioned by God, that men need controlled rowdiness in their lives, that men have a unique gift for bonding together, the ways they're inspired, the power their words have amongst other people, et cetera, et cetera. All these aspects of manhood, the guardian protector motif in a man, all of that's created by God. So part of my task is to help distinguish what's godly, what's by design, and then what has just been a sinful construct that's been added on to manhood, so that manhood is in the crisis that it's in today. So that's the best answer I can give you, I think, on that one.
What are some ways that men do bring masculinity down, that we do give a bad name to that?
Well, when we use the same strengths and abilities and the power of our words that we've been given to ennoble and protect and build up and call out goodness in people, especially those we're responsible for, wives, children, friends, etc. And instead, we use it to dominate. We do use it to curse. We use it to bust people up. Any man that's ever raised a fist to a woman is engaged in toxic masculinity. He's abusing the gift God gave him of his physical strength to dominate. The power of words. Men have exceptional power of words. I remember almost everything my Army officer father ever said directly to me about me. Because it was so powerful, so transforming. And so most of it was negative in the early days, and then later it became positive, and it transformed me. So when men allow what is God ordained about them to be perverted, to be deformed, their appetites, they're meant to be aggressive. They're meant to be men. Men are meant to have appetites and drives, and I believe every man ought to have some form of controlled violence. Ought to be breaking a barrier of performance in his athletic life, even if it's just mall walking for a 95-year-old guy. He needs to be pushing against a barrier. All that's God ordained stuff. But when that becomes about doing destructive things, when the sex drive we've been given becomes about shoving 20s in some girl's underwear at the pole, or having a series of affairs, or fathering children we're not responsible for, all of that I perceive as perversion of the gift we've been given.
You talk a lot in your books and in your Great Man podcast about the necessity in your life of a band of brothers and how you put that together. And a lot of the things you just hit on, it seems like having that band of brothers in your life has prevented some of those apparent stumbling blocks from interfering and causing issues in your personal life and in your marriage, in your ministry, and in your business. How is it that men, as disconnected as we are, can continue to move forward or push towards building a band of brothers?
Yeah, it's a real important issue. And I think the first thing is men have to recognize they need other men. We aren't meant to walk alone. You know as well as I do that the male suicide rate is skyrocketing in the Western world. And in England, when they do the psychological postmortem, they look at the suicide notes. Almost every single time, the notes say, there's not a man alive on earth that knows anything about what's going on in my life. I don't have a single male friend anywhere close. Well, they might have female friends, but their life doesn't really have meaning unless they have male friends. And when they get to a certain age, they have zero male friends. Well, then the kind of depression that leads to suicide sneaks in. So men are usually walking alone. Most men in the Western world have what psychologists call rust friends. Rust friends are like the guy who was in your wedding, but you talked to him maybe twice in the last 5 years. Guys you knew in the Army, guys you knew in college, but they faded. Maybe they're a phone call once every so often. True friends are close enough to know what's going on in your life without you having to narrate it for them. True friends care about you enough to speak into your life. So I'm a big believer in men intentionally building a band of brothers. Our modern American lives, especially, grow us out of those relationships. And eventually a guy hits middle age. He's got the house, the wife, the kids, the car, the career, and he's isolated. He doesn't have anybody he can name as a best friend. So I teach men to realize that they need to have a band of brothers. And then I teach them how to build that band of brothers, which even for the shyest guy, really, the core art is the art of the indirect connection. You put a bunch of guys, Pastor, listen up now. You put a bunch of guys in a fellowship hall, and you have them all circle up chairs and look in each other's eyes meaningfully. And then you say to Bob, tell us what your emotions are today. What are you feeling, Bob? Ain't nobody coming back.
I don't have emotions.
Ain't nobody coming back next week. So what we got to do is teach guys how to have the indirect connection. Men get to know each other while they're doing something else other than getting to know each other. They're fixing the widow's house, or they're shooting hoops and having a beer afterwards, or they're whatever, going for a hunting trip, going fishing, jogging, watching the game with a hamburger in their hand, whatever. We get to know each other indirectly. And then once I teach them the art of how to get to know each other, so even the shyest guy has this under his own control, then the goal is to get with a band of guys, start talking meaningfully about what it means to really be a man, start enlisting help. And what you're going for is the free fire zone. The free fire zone is an arrangement amongst men in which anything that needs to be said to make us better will be said. Nobody's going to be twiddling their thumbs and rubbing their hands and going, oh my God, I hope somebody talks to him. We're in each other's lives. We care about each other. We confront each other. We coach each other to our best. And that has made all the difference in my life. I'm a pretty competent guy, but I grew up as a military brat moving every year. So I was very alone. I'm also an introvert, even though I'm the kind of introvert that can do okay in front of people on stage. And I got to tell you, I was walking the first half of my life alone. And no major moral blow-ups happened because of that, but the loss of potential, the loss of my best self was just obvious. And now I walk very closely with a band of brothers, several different concentric circles of that, and it's massively different. It makes all the difference in my life. So anyway, I'm a big advocate for it and talked a lot about this in my book, Building Your Band of Brothers.
Yeah, we often joke about with our men's group that one of the greatest miracles that Jesus performed is that he had 12 close friends whenever he was in his 30s. And that tends to be one of the greatest disparages that we're seeing, not just demographically where we're at, but also one of the things we focused a lot of our podcasting topics on. We had a guy named Stephen Ryder on a couple of weeks ago who runs the Holy Smokes podcast, which is just a network of guys around the world.
Exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, they do, they get together and smoke cigars. I know you're not a cigar guy. You got to save your throat, but that it's one of those things where it hits on exactly that point that you're talking about, that we need to be doing something else because we won't sit on the couch and look longingly into one another. We hardly do that with our wives, let alone sit down with another guy.
After we had heard that from Steve, I told my wife, like, listen, if from now on, if you ever want to just really sit down and talk to me, grab a cigar and ask me if I want to go outside. Like, I'll say yes, and I'll talk to you for hours while we're out there. So I really like the point you made about indirect, getting to know other men indirectly. I had never thought of that.
Yeah.
But that's absolutely true.
My favorite illustration real quick is that you can take 5 guys who have never met each other, put them in a pickup basketball game, and within minutes they are coaching each other, encouraging each other, calling for the ball, chastising each other. Don't hog it, man. Throw it down. I'm free under the hoop. All that kind of stuff. I mean, immediately we start. Why? Because we have a task and we have an indirect connection. And by the time that game is over, these guys are heading out for a beer and a pizza because they feel kind of a kinship. And so that to me is the model. When men have a purpose, when they have something else they're going after with other men, that's how they bond. I come from a military background, not me personally, but my father was Special Forces, and I grew up as a military brat. And the guys my father was in foxholes with, the guys he fought in Vietnam with, they were his closest buds. Why? They'd had a purpose. They bonded. It went deep. And that's what men do.
So I actually wanted to see, you had mentioned rust friends, which I thought was an interesting coin. You also mentioned in the book, Men on Fire, Idiot Man and Dog Man. I was hoping you could expand on those.
Oh, I'm happy to. I really resent the portrayal of men in our modern media. And almost every guy I see on TV is either idiot man. Now, this is the guy who's doing a happy dance in his house in a commercial because he found the remote control stuck on the couch somewhere. He's doing a happy dance. His wife and his kids are in the kitchen rolling their eyes. Dad's such an idiot. And so idiot man is everywhere. Idiot man's almost in every television commercial. He's the idiot male who just is so stupid that nobody wants to be around him.
Like Homer Simpson?
Pardon?
Well, I was like Homer Simpson or, something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. All those images, most television commercials, a lot of movies, just idiot man. Quite frankly, almost any middle-aged man portrayed on television is idiot man. And then there's dog man. We all know what he's doing. He's thinking with his crotch. He's sitting at the bar, shoving 20s into some girl's underwear, and then he sniffs the air and he goes off to some other bar, some other place. And so he's driven by his lusts. He's the kind of guy who produces children he's not responsible for. He's just a dog is what he is. And I'm not those two men. You guys aren't those two men, but that's how manhood tends to be portrayed negatively if they're not just out and out portrayed as abusers. So I'm hammering those images because that's not what most of the guys are I know. And I don't want young kids growing up with those images only as the negative reflections of who they are in society.
So what would you define as a true man, one that is called by God? There's idiot man, dog man. What would you? Is there another term for the man following the correct path?
Yeah, for me, the correct path is to know that manhood is made by God, and to seek to use all of your powers for noble purposes, for godly purposes. Now that's almost a Sunday school definition, and I try to avoid religiously kind of language when it comes to talking about men, even though I'm an outspoken Christian and a former pastor and everything else. But my point is that I believe that when men understand that God has made them awesome and powerful and meant for noble purposes. And then they start learning how to harness and use their powers for good. And when they realize the power of their words, for example, I've mentioned this 2 or 3 times, to look into their 12-year-old daughter and say, you are beautiful. And I see amazing things in you. I can't believe the way God's made you. Your future, I mean, it's going to be unbelievable to watch what God unfold, what he's doing with you. So I'm here to guard you and walk you through that. But I just want you to know I'm your biggest fan. And I'm thrilled with what God's done with you. I'll tell you what, if the average guy with a 12-year-old daughter would say something like that to her and mean it and then stick close to her, it would be transforming. Why? Because men's words are exceptionally powerful, particularly in the whole art of calling out destinies, of affirming destinies, of identifying destinies for the young. So there's just an example of what a godly man would be. So I think noble manhood is a man who's using his powers for good because he understands they come from God. Now, at the same time, I want to say very quickly, this also is a lot of fun. I teach men they got to have controlled rowdiness. I teach men that they got to have a band of brothers, and it ought to be mainly fun, not just all sitting around confronting each other about their manners or their bank account or, how they're handling their kids. It ought to be rowdy. It ought to be fun. My band of brothers and I have a ball. But at the same time, while we're having a ball, we're likely to confront a guy while we're driving down the road just because he's messing up. We want to tell him before we get where we're going what he needs to fix. And so it's fun. It's tremendous. It dispels the loneliness of our generation, but mainly because we understand who we are as God has created us.
You've used a phrase a couple of times, and after reading your stuff, I'm familiar with it, but maybe our audience isn't. What is controlled rowdiness? Because it sounds really cool.
I'm in.
Yeah, I want to be in. But what's the working definition of controlled rowdiness as you're using it this evening?
Controlled rowdiness is a hard-hitting sport. It's a dad stripping down to his underwear with his 6 sons and beating the tar out of each other on the living room floor. It's what we used to call smear the queer. We didn't mean that in any kind of sexual identity way. We meant that just in, pound the guy who's got the ball, getting in the pool and beating the tar out of each other. Men need controlled rowdiness. Sports is basically controlled rowdiness. We need to strip down to our shorts and our hiking boots and go up that mountain on a cold day with steam just pouring off our bodies. Everybody needs to have that. Now, not everybody is the outdoorsman. I'm not as much of an outdoorsman as you might think. But everybody needs to be doing something. I'm working out hard to break some personal records. I've decided I want to hike 50 miles, take up that 50-mile challenge that Theodore Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy challenged the military with. So in my life, I'm working out to be able to hike 50 miles in one day and come back. It's going to take me a little while. I work during COVID, especially. I worked on body weight exercises and blew up records with push-ups. I mean, went from 2 to 3. I mean, it wasn't anything impressive. All I'm saying is that you're just working out, trying to bust records. And so men need rowdiness. I wrestle all the time with my grandson. When we pick him up at school, he looks at his grandma, who he calls BB, and it's hi BB, and he gives her a hug and he gives her a kiss, and then he turns to me and he goes, ah. It's almost like a tribal greeting, And the first words out of his mouth are, Papa, can we wrestle? He wants to wrestle right there in the parking lot, because that's a lot of our relationship is just stripping down to our underwear and whooping each other. So men need to have that in some form. I admit not all men are wired exactly the same way, and I'm not saying you got to go kill a moose and haul it back to civilization. I've never have. I'm just saying that men need to do that, have that in their lives. For me, during most of my life, it was racquetball. I would play racquetball for 2 hours, sweat. When I came off the court, I couldn't remember if my children were in the nursery, where I had to be next. My brain had cleared, but I'd had 2 hours of all-out war. And I think we're made for that at some level, each of us.
That's awesome. I can actually say that Lucas has done that for me, the controlled rowdiness. We've known each other for a very long time, and I've been in a bad mood many of those times, and he would always threaten me if I wouldn't get in a better mood that he was going to fight me, and he on more than one occasion would fight me to get me out of that bad mood, and it worked. So I got to give him that.
Well, thank you. You talked about the way that your grandson greeted you, and it seems, especially in listening to your most recent podcast, that there is this sort of rite of passage and ritual that comes along with those kind of encounters, especially generationally that a father or grandfather passes down to their son or grandson. Why are rituals in men, especially men in the same family, such an important thing? And why are we in sort of modern civilization or modern society, why are we moving away from those things? And how do you think that's hurt us?
Yeah, I think rituals are unbelievably important. First of all, they're a natural part of life. As soon as a child is born, I can tell you with my little 4-year-old grandson, we do anything, he wants to do it the same way next time. You read him a book at 8 o'clock in the evening as he's going to bed. You're now going to read 5 books over the next weeks. It's going to become a tradition. Whatever we do, however we wrestle, and he'll stop me and say, "No, Papa, we didn't do it that last time. We didn't do it that way last time." I mean, he'll actually arrange things so we do it exactly the same way. And if I don't say there are certain words that I said last time, like "I'm going to get you," if I don't say it that way, he'll go, "No, you're not doing it right," because he has this code in his soul for ritual. And so we all know that families have rituals, children have rituals. The issue is that in our society, which tends right now to be a little bit anti-tradition, a little bit busting up the old ways, and definitely distracted with screens and media, social media, we are not doing the rituals that make life meaningful. I love the British tradition of tea. Having tea late in the afternoon when the family would come together and they'd have tea. Okay, it may not be my ritual or yours, but it was something regular. It brought people together. It got them talking. I decided to have a Christmas tea every year with my kids. You cannot believe what it's become. Now they've married and we got grandchildren. And the tea every year is, I don't mean to be blasphemous here because we all honor Christmas and all are Christians. So obviously we're about Jesus, but that tea is almost like the biggest thing. Where are we going to be? Who's flying in where? How are we going to pull it off? And it was just something that I created, but it's a time when we talk and affirm each other and talk about the new year and what it means to us. So I believe in manly rituals. It doesn't matter to me what it is. If it's the two of you on your back porch with some brown water, if it's a stogie fest, around the fire pit, if it's the weekly jog with the pizza and beer afterwards so you can check on each other, whatever it is, I like rituals. I believe in them. I think we should be initiating our boys when they step into adolescence. There's that famous African proverb, if we do not initiate the boys, they will burn the village down just to feel its warmth. Mm-hmm. And that really is the way it is. And that's why I think even street gangs have got initiations that mean the world to a 13-year-old inner city kid. So I come from a military background, as I say. I come from a certain school of theology as a Christian, very ritual oriented in the good way of what they mean and how they affirm. And I'm a big believer in it. I think families can evolve them on their own. I think men should evolve them together. And I think it's part of us reclaiming a healthy, wholesome, godly, masculine culture.
Yeah, you mentioned the African proverb of if the boys don't have anything to do, then they'll burn the city down. Shifting gears a little bit, and I want to tie this into a question about men on fire as well as what we're seeing societally today, that we have a lot of civil unrest on all areas of the political spectrum, and there's a lot of people who have believed that now they are politically homeless. And a lot of the unrest that we believe that we're seeing, and especially in some of the people that we've talked to, is that they feel like they have to fight against something because they weren't taught that. You say specifically in Men on Fire that we have to realize, you write about serving the season that you are in. As men, and we see all of these things that are happening around us, how do we serve in this season as examples of what godly manhood is, in order that our kids or the men that we're banded with in this band of brothers aren't those that are turning to burn down the village right now?
Well, it's a great question. And I got to tell you, I believe that when you're approaching manhood from a godly perspective, you also believe, maybe not in hyper predestination, but you do believe that seasons are ordained for you. Paul said to the Thessalonians, don't be troubled by don't be disconcerted by my troubles. Don't you know I was destined for them? A Christian believes that there are seasons prepared for him. Ephesians 2:10, that there are works prepared for us in advance to walk into or to enter them. So COVID hits, and a Christian, even though there may be sadness, and even though there may be a little bit of fear, a Christian goes, you know what? God knew this was coming. I'm prepared for this. I'm going to step into it. I'm going to own this thing. I'm going to do the right thing, love my family well, be a righteous man in this situation, use my gifts as a man to help others, heal others, strengthen my community, make this a good time. I said at the beginning of COVID on one of my podcasts, you may have heard it, that I expected by the time this was over, we'd have people telling us what we heard from the period of the Great Depression. I have interviewed people who lived through the Great Depression and said the family life, the culture, the richness, our home, our arts at home, our love for each other, the hobbies, the rituals. I never had a richer life later on. It was the best time of my life. Now, that just sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? That the Great Depression of all things would be the best time in your life. But I understand what they mean. They felt closer to people. The family would sing together. The mom would play on the keyboard, the piano, and they'd sing together. And everybody go out and work every day to earn the few quarters they were going to earn. But they'd come back and pool that. And they had enough to eat. And they gave thanks to God. And they'd have joke-telling contests and listen to fun things on the radio. And they attested later it was one of the richest times ever. Well, that's the way it is when you realize you're called to something. You're called to a season. You're ordained for it. This isn't an accident. It's something that I am sent into, and I'm going to own it. I'm going to live it out well. I'm going to live it out in such a way that when it's all over, in a sense, there are parts of this that are my finest hour. Yes, I'm quoting Churchill, that this was my finest hour. And my wife, Bev, and I have tried to live through COVID very much that way, helping people, serving people, giving, trying to be exemplary, trying to help folks, trying to live. So when we look back on this season, we remember that we didn't just tremble on our couch in fear, but that we made a difference in people's lives. And I think all of that is the way a good man, a godly man, approaches difficult seasons.
That's a lot to chew on.
Yeah,
I think especially here. And I get to work really closely with our local police department. We're seeing as much of this sort of good outcome of COVID, there's people rallying around one another. But it seems like the longer it goes, one of the troubling statistics that we're seeing is that we're also seeing this increase in domestic violence within the home. And a lot of frustration that's happening as men are continuing out of work, but really a lot of it is centered around some of the homeschooling things. What would you say to men who are now in the home maybe 30, 40 hours more during a week than they would be otherwise? What are the best things that they can do to deal with their children and the idle time that they have where they're not getting to go to work? How can they still have that warrior spirit at the home?
Well, it's a great question. And I think I can bullet point for it real quick. First of all, don't see yourself as a victim in this process. See this as an opportunity. Now, that's a hard shift to make. But if a man's sitting home feeling victimized, maybe he lost his job or he's furloughed, so he's going to sit around and drink whiskey and eat Oreos and gain 40, 50 pounds and just see him and just wallow in his self-pity, he's not going to be what he's made to be. So number one, don't see yourself as a victim. See this as an opportunity. Number two, think of yourself as the culture keeper in your home. A man is meant to set the tone in the home. And I'm not just speaking, by the way, to married men, to single men, same thing. When I speak on university campuses, I tell roommates the same thing. You guys should be competing almost to create a noble, inspiring, encouraging culture in that dorm room, on your wing, with your band of brothers. And so you be the culture keeper. Let your word shape, fashion a positive, inspirational, a righteous attitude in the home. To have goals, target goals. Like I was saying earlier, I decided that I was going to work out even harder. I cycled a lot, played racquetball, but now, I got to get on the floor, push-ups, sit-ups, burpees, all the stuff. It's harder. It's actually physically harder. But I set goals. I set financial goals. I set academic goals and learning goals. I set physical goals. I encourage those around me, my kids. My son's 35, my daughter's 30, but we're all very close. And so I said, what do you want to accomplish during this time? When it's all over, what do you want to say that you accomplished? And they're tearing down goals, and we're encouraging each other. And my son's going to do that 50-mile walk I was talking about earlier with me. So he's up in New York where he lives, running stairs and everything to get ready for this thing. So it's a matter of understanding that this has not happened to you, but instead God has sent you into it, and that you can accomplish some great things. So really, this can be a time of accomplishment and achievement and advance. So on the other side, you are actually able to say, as it says in Psalm 119, it was good that I suffered, that I might embrace God's ways. And that's the approach I've had to this situation, to this season.
So you mentioned a little bit ago about serving the season that you're in, and you mentioned that with you and your wife that during COVID you've been able to help people and some of those things. But what does this look like for you specifically? this season.
You must have been spying on me. Let me tell you what I've been dealing with during COVID. We've not only had COVID, one of us had a serious health crisis. I don't want to go any further into that, but we've had months and months and months of therapy. Then both our idiot sons, I have a son and a stepson, decided to get married within 2 weeks of each other.
Congratulations, by the way.
During this period. Thank you very much. We're thrilled, and I'm having fun picking on them. But still, that was quite a bit. In addition to that, you're gonna weep over this one. We've got two homes, one in DC and Nashville. I think you probably know that because of what I do in DC. And both of them flooded during this time.
Oh,
both of them got doused by broken pipes of some kind. And we've had to have both of them rebuilt during this period. So since May, we have had layer on top of layer on top of layer. But the good news is, thank God, first of all, for insurance. But the good news is that my wife just look at each other and go, all right, I love you. You love me. God's with us. This is the season that I don't know why it's happened. I'm not telling you I'm happy about it. I'm not sitting here going, praise the Lord, my house got doused and her personal property was destroyed. But I am saying, all right, this was ordained for me. God knew it was coming. I'm prepared for it. We must go through many difficulties to enter the kingdom. I'm going to own this thing. And we're just about to get out of it. We're going to be out of it here in about 6 weeks. But I'm telling you that this has been a season that I've had to just say, I'm going to be a good man. I'm going to walk through this thing. I'm going to glorify God. I'm going to love my wife well. I'm going to be a better man on the other side. And we're going to own this thing. And I think that is a godly response. I haven't done it perfectly. And I've had my days of saying, Lord, I sure have better things to do with my time than sit around and talk to contractors about drywall. But still, that's where we are. And that's how we've handled it. So you want to know how it looks for me? Everything I've just said, I'm living to the nth degree in 2020. It's been the most unusual year of my life. And yet I'll have to say that I'm pretty much moving from victory to victory, tough as it's been, because of the grace of God and these basic attitudes that I've been taught through my life by other good men.
That's pretty incredible. And I have to say that your sons must have a little something smart going on with them, because I also got married during the pandemic, and thus far, 7 months in, it's working out pretty well. So, there is something to be said for having a partner during isolation. So we'll leave it at that.
Great.
With so many of the things going on, if we can shift, you talked about you've got a house in Nashville. I know your wife Bev is incredibly involved in songwriting and those kind of things. Is very talented in her own regard, and
Yes.
And you also have a home right outside of DC. You do a lot of work in the political sphere, which I will have to say is one of the things that attracted me the most to your podcast. Is as a Christian, and you do tend to be just to the right of center. There are just a couple of issues that sort of push you in that direction. You really do tend to take a very neutral position when we're having a conversation about good men, about noble men, and then we look at the options that we've been given for the top leadership in our country. It's hard to identify all of these, these seven fires that you said, and where they actually line up in their lives. We've been put now in a position where the news media and the things that the presidents or the let's say presidential candidates, we'll put it that way, are saying tend to be really opposed to one another. We've entered into a huge time of unrest. What do you see happening, let's just say, in the next 3 to 6 weeks? Do you think that we'll actually have a declared president-elect? Do you think that this will carry into the beginning of 2021? What do you see as a brilliant political mind that we don't, sitting here in Dallas, Texas?
Boy, there's an introduction to it.
Yeah, there you go.
I think that we will see this season of challenges and lawsuits dissipate within the next couple of weeks. And I would guess in the first couple of weeks of December, that Donald Trump will concede, that we will have, of course, I believe it's December the 11th that the official certification was scheduled to take place anyway. You have elections, and then the election has to be certified, and that happens about 5 to 6 weeks after the election. So I believe it's December 11th that the election is exactly certified, that the Electoral College finalizes its vote, all of that kind of thing. And so I expect, I certainly don't blame Donald Trump in these tight races for filing a lawsuit. I don't think any major corruption has been found. I've asked my pollster friends and investigator friends in D.C. Some of them can't tell me everything that they know, but they've said no major corruption's been found. So, there's a little edge of corruption in every presidential election. I've always loved what William Buckley said. He said, my grandfather died in 1919, but he had such a strong sense of civic duty that he voted for Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1936. And so that's, there's always throughout history been you don't know that the guy in the small town who's running the polls isn't, slanting the vote a little bit or whatever. There's always that thing that's possible. But today, with the monitors and the lawyers for both parties and the FBI even, and people of different parties watching each other at the polls, even though they get along great, I think there's been very, very little corruption, frankly. And that's not me picking on Donald Trump. So I think we're going to see the lawsuits wash through unless something shocking happens. There's been a little bit of corruption on Earth, but it's not enough to change even one state or even a county yet. And this is, I got to tell you, as a guy who's been a student of elections and a historian, this is normal. You always have people later who say, hey, like in one of Lyndon Johnson's elections, an entire ballot box was found late, and every vote in it was for Lyndon Johnson. Well, that sounds like some corruption to me, but he went on to the Senate and became president, vice president. So all of that to say, I think we'll see it all wash through in the next couple of weeks. I don't think it's going to surface anything huge. And I think the first couple of weeks of December, we'll see certification and we'll start moving forward. That doesn't mean Trump's going to be happy about it. Doesn't mean that Trump and Biden are going to get along. You're going to see smiley faces over a beer or whatever. But I do think that you're going to see a transition that ends up with Joe Biden being inaugurated on January 20th. What do I think is going to happen with Trump? I think he's going to step out. I think he's going to be loyal opposition, not loyal opposition, but fiery opposition. I think he's going to continue to define the GOP. And I think it's very possible he's going to run again in 2024. I think it's very possible. He's already talking about it.
Yeah, we actually, that was going to be one of our follow-up questions about that. I know I'd seen comments earlier this week from Lindsey Graham that said that he might actually support a 2024 bid by Donald Trump. With that in particular, you did write a book called Choosing Donald Trump that's specifically about the way that a lot of the, I guess, sort of religious pundits backed Donald Trump, which otherwise would have seemed just completely ridiculous. Why do you think that a lot of the people that were, quote unquote, God-fearing or religious leaders, and now in the post-2020 election, we see that the largest amount of blue-collar workers and the largest demographic of black people in particular voted for Donald Trump more than they have any other Republican candidate? Why do you think it is he's become so polarizing in these areas?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, part of the problem is that Donald Trump is his own worst enemy. He's actually done some pretty amazing things for minorities. For example, since you listen to my podcast, you already know, I work very closely with the African-American community. I go to a largely African-American church. I've got about a half a dozen African-Americans in my family. I've guest lectured in African-American history at places like Tuskegee and so on. And I care very much about that part of the world. So, for example, Donald Trump's done more for historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, than any other president of recent memory. Also, we should move as a nation away from identity politics, but the idea that a man improves the economy means all ships rise. Rising tide lifts all ships. And so he's done a huge amount for African Americans, done a huge amount for Hispanic community, done a huge amount for whites. Why? Because he has, in fact, or either he's inherited or he's engineered an improved economy, cut taxes, limited foreign control of our economy, things like that. So he's done a lot of good things. The problem with Donald Trump is that he is louder than his message, his manner, his bombast, his tweeting, his language, his cussing, his relationship with strippers, his insults. It shouts louder than the good things he's done. And I asked some people in DC, why didn't you run a commercial where, it was just basically saying, listen to what Donald Trump's done. Like have Tom Selleck get up on television and say, what has Donald Trump done for us? And start to list 7 or 8 things that he's done that would shock people. Like, for example, that he was maybe the best president for historically black colleges and universities in several generations. So the problem is that Donald Trump is the shiny object that's distracting everybody from the actual core message. So that's the problem. He's harsh, he's bombastic, he's rude. People quickly hate him. Even those who support him have to hold the nose to do it. And so that's what happened in this election. The benefit he was to society was not the main thing known. I bet you did not see one television commercial that said that Donald Trump did the following things for America. Instead, it was Donald Trump attacking
it was an
sleepy Joe
attack
Biden,
ad.
and it just didn't work.
So I actually wanted to find out what you think about the Democratic Party at the moment, because it seems like right now they're going through an existential crisis of are they going down the socialist road or not?
I don't think they're going down socialist road. I think many of them are centrists, are moderates. There's no question that their platform is leaning way left, and I would even say, as a Christian, immoral. And that's why a lot of folks, there are a lot of evangelicals who are fairly moderate, but they just can't step on the Democratic platform, so to speak, because of where it stands on abortion and gays and all kinds of other things. Whereas they really would agree with maybe some kind of national health care process. And they see that the Democrats often leave the economy in great shape, and they think the poor ought to be helped by the state and things like that. But it's the morality issues that keep them off of that platform. So I don't think the Democratic Party is just completely going down the Marxist road. I do think there's a danger that some of the loudest and most media-friendly voices are trying to take it socialist and left-leaning, but they're not getting very far. People put up with Bernie Sanders because he's the dotty uncle who's making a lot of noise at the Thanksgiving meal. But he hasn't pulled a large vote. He hasn't been a serious threat. AOC, the same thing. She's pretty and she's on Vogue magazine and so on. But her broadcasts from her dorm room aren't gaining a lot of traction. So I'm not too concerned about the squad. I'm not too concerned about the leftists. I'll tell you frankly, there's a game in politics. Anchor yourself way out on the fringe, and maybe you can pull things a little bit your way. Some of these people anchor themselves on the socialist extreme because they just want to make a few inches of progress, and they find that anchoring themselves on the extreme gives them that leverage to pull the party to the left. So Joe Biden's a centrist. His vice president, Kamala Harris, is much further to the left than he is, and is dangerous, I think, on the issue of religion and abortion. But I don't think he's going to be pulled way left. I think the future of the Democratic Party is in danger of going far left, but I don't think during this administration.
I've got a quick question for you about, and we'll be wrapping up our time because we want to be respectful. We know you have other things you got to get to this evening. With the way that, especially in the far extremes on the left and the right, one of the things that I have noticed is sort of pulling people towards the middle with people that were in the late 90s and the early 2000s, classic liberals, speaking specifically of the three people that did Cynical Theories with Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, who are classic liberal atheists that are now seeing this sort of rise in their own, popularity and the sales of their books from people that are more centrist Christians. And what is your take on how these two groups, being, classic liberal atheists and now the centric Christians, that seem to be coming together on a political spectrum? And what do you see the future of that being? And do you think there's a danger in it?
I don't think there's a danger in it as long as the Christians are, to use the fancy phrase, epistemologically aware. As long as they know where they're coming from, as long as they know what they believe, why they believe what they believe. Politics makes strange bedfellows, as somebody once said. You end up allying and teaming with people that frankly surprise you. At a light level, I'm a Protestant, but I work with a huge number of Catholics on pro-life issues, just as a small example. And I work with Muslims on other kinds of issues. So I think you find yourself teaming up with people who aren't like you. I'm not that concerned about that. I think there's a lot we can learn as those Christians who are active in our current politics could learn a lot from classic liberals. Obviously, they need to stay away from the atheism. Obviously, they need to realize the rationalism. But there's some wisdom there. I mean, much of our American political system is rooted in some of those thinkers, and it's okay. I mean, Socrates wasn't a believer either. Plato wasn't a believer either. Condorcet and Diderot and Rousseau and all the boys who are the intellectual forefathers of our country, so to speak, and of course, including Scripture. They all added something, and most of them were messes in some way. So we have to learn how to take good ideas, no matter the source, make them our own, and then move forward. So I'm not too concerned about it as long as the Christians know who they are and know in whom they have believed.
Just thank you again, Stephen Mansfield, author of Men on Fire. Tell you what, if you don't mind, we do have a sign-off saying, if you wouldn't mind saying, this is Stephen Mansfield, however you want to identify yourself with, best-selling author or whatever. And then this is why you should never listen to the Reverend and the Reprobate podcast. It's a little tongue-in-cheek.
This is Stephen Mansfield, New York Times best-selling author and speaker, and this is why you should not ever even log on or watch the Reverend and the Reprobate.
You're the man.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks very much. You have a great evening. God bless, buddy.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mansfield. It's also nice to not be in your suit.
Yeah.
Like
That was the first thing.
there is something to that.
Cut. Hold on.
Yep. Yeah.
And also, I was glad he let us off the hook with the. You don't have to dress up. I'm around guys and they're wearing their underwear and t-shirts.
Yeah, that'll be
Perfect.
great. That'll be great next time.
Yeah, next time.
Yeah.
we'll do underwear and t-shirts.
I don't know that that's what I'm gonna do next time, but yeah, this was much different than the interviews we've done in the past.
Yeah.
A lot of the guys that we've interviewed before are experts in their fields, but they're not. I guess they're not such conveyors of information like he is.
It was.
The guy's written over 20 books, but this felt like absorbing, information or water through a fire hydrant. Like that's what it was like, or water through a fire hose, I think is the actual phrase. But there was so much happening, and we were talking about it in our little in between time. It almost felt like we were half a beat behind on the questions because it seemed like he was already answering something that my mind was getting to but hadn't gotten to yet.
Yeah. He's done this before, like we talked about.
Yeah. For sure.
He's a world-renowned speaker, author. He's written 20 books. Was it 20?
Over 20. I've got 8 of them.
Yeah.
And there are like some of the books that I have aren't even.
This pile's
really
embarrassing.
It was funny when we were first talking to him before. I pointed to my pile of books and I was like, actually, this is my personal. Can you come autograph? No, I didn't ask him if he could come do that. But I've read these. I've had a ton of people that I've given these books to that has completely changed their perspective on certain things. We roll our young men in our youth group. A lot of our college men go through these books, especially the Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, because it's so, like, I guess it just speaks really to the core of who we know we are in our hearts. And again, with his book, Killing Jesus, and we talked to him about this before the interview, I feel like he writes in a way that makes it more intellectually available than some other authors, right? Even then, and as much as I love the book Wild at Heart, even more than John Eldredge, because he's telling stories. He's not preaching to you about like, this is why you need to be, this type of man, and this is where you failed. He tells, and he uses Winston Churchill and Teddy Roosevelt a lot as examples, but the chapter titles are attributes, like humor. This is why, humor is important. Here's some stories about how men have used humor in their lives, or stories about leaders that have used humor or have been in humorous situations. And, the same thing with friendship. He uses biblical examples. He uses examples of world leaders, but those examples are things that we can relate to. And it's not like here are a bunch of theories on manhood, or here are a bunch of things that you should do as a man. Like, here are examples of men actually doing these things, playing these things out. What do you think you can learn from that? And there was so much of what he was talking about that felt like it was that exact thing in Ben Shapiro's Speak Speed.
Yeah. You mentioned absorbing, trying to drink through a fire hose, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to be absorbring that for quite a while. There's a
No
lot.
doubt.
There's a lot that he said that I couldn't speak to at the moment, but I'm going to be absorbing.
Yeah, I really, that's the first interview situation that I've been in where I felt like I was trying to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of trying to sort out my next question. Like, as he was finishing up a thought, I felt like I was about 3 words behind catching up to where he was, because everything he said, and I'll steal this phrase from a friend of mine who teaches pastors, that each thing he said was pregnant with meaning.
Yeah.
That he used so many different phrases and things that I'd never heard of before, that I was only familiar with because of his books or because of his podcasts, which are phenomenal. And we need to definitely promote that. You need to check him out on Facebook, on Instagram. All of his podcasts will have them linked in there. Mansfield Writes, I think, is his Twitter handle. It's also his Instagram thing. And then you've got StephenMansfield.tv, GreatMan.tv. And
Great Man, one word.
Yeah, one word.
Like Florida Man.
Like Florida Man.
I think
right?
that's the best way to explain it.
Yeah, no doubt. And so those are absolutely incredible resources that you can get a hold of if you liked what Stephen said, and they're bite size. And maybe that was part of each one of his answers was this. It was 45 minutes worth of information crammed into a couple of minutes. Like, there were so many things that we could unpack. You know, we talked about the definition of, the warrior spirit and the idiot man and the dog man, but there was a phrase that he continued to use, controlled rowdiness, that he used 3 or 4 times, where we were finally like, hey, what does this mean?
Yeah. Well, we both instinctually knew what it meant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything that he says, I think, at least to me, speaks to the core of my masculinity.
Right.
Like, I understood exactly what it meant. Controlled rowdiness. I do that with my son all the time.
Right.
It's something that we both need. I almost told him, but I didn't want to interrupt him or get off topic because he had a lot of good information. But
oh, man.
I almost told him this, for me, is controlled rowdiness.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
He mentioned basketball, sports.
Racquetball.
That's not really my jam.
Right.
My version of rowdiness is talking and joking around and getting little on the edge of things sometimes.
Yeah.
That's what I really enjoy. And this for me, I think we've talked about this enough, but having the brotherhood and having the friendship, especially now, at any time, but especially now with all of the seclusion that's going on, I could totally relate with what he was talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things he talks about specifically in Mansfield's book of Manly Men is the type of relationship with masculinity that men have, and that being a masculine man and being a good man does not mean that you have to be of the sort of like Greek god stature. You don't have to be somebody that's way into sports or athletics. And you see that a lot with
maybe Hephaestus.
You're going to have to talk to me about what
Greek
is Hephaestus.
God.
Oh gosh.
He's the blacksmith. He's the paunchy.
Yeah, you don't I'm following you now. Yeah.
Sorry, it was a very nerdy joke.
Not everybody's going to be Adonis. So his definition of that, I think, is really important. It's in that book. I would encourage everybody to read it, and I do mean everybody to read it. If you have a man,
except for you,
but
do go smash that like button.
Oh my gosh, you're fired. If you have a man in your life, this is a book that you should read. If you're a mom of boys, if you are a wife that's trying to better understand your husband, if you are a dad that you're not only you're trying to shape your kids, but you're seeing that you might be the only male figure in the lives of your kids' friends. There's so many single moms right now that the only male figure that's in the lives of these kids are their the friends are the dads of their friends. Mm-hmm. This is something that is just one of those, it speaks directly to the heart of men. You were talking, there's a lot of those things that we just instinctively
controlled
know,
rowdiness.
like controlled
I know
rowdiness.
exactly what he's talking about.
Well, he would also say that not just this.
It's something that moms hate.
That we're doing, it can be.
Hey, knock it off.
Yeah.
We're not breaking anything. We're just wrestling.
Yeah, it's fine, right? We moved all the furniture out of the middle of the room.
Yeah, there's a little blood, but it's fine.
Yeah, I'm keeping him away. We covered the fireplace with a pool noodle. It's okay.
Yeah.
But one of the other ways that I think of controlled rowdiness is like with the Inklings. Are you familiar with the Inklings? The Inklings were this group of writers. It was J.R.R. Tolkien, it was C.S. Lewis, it was Lewis's brother, and several other guys. And where controlled rowdiness was for them, they didn't get out and fight one another or anything like that. What they did, though, was they critiqued one another's works. And that as they gathered together and began to critique one another's works, Tolkien was writing The Lord of the Rings, and people were talking to him about all of the crazy stuff that was in The Lord of the Rings. Lewis was writing the Chronicles of Narnia, and Tolkien didn't like it.
Yeah, it was like, why is there a lion in here? Talking lion?
He was...
Come on.
He had a problem with how...
What about Bombadil, Tolkien? Why don't you quit being so judgmental?
Well...
I mean, I love Tom Bombadil. I'm just saying it doesn't really fit.
It doesn't resonate as well.
Yeah, it doesn't fit as much. We've talked about this already. I don't want to go down that road again.
Sure. But, I mean, there's a reason Bombadil wasn't in the movies, right?
Yeah, because he makes no sense.
So there's this type of controlled rowdiness that might just be, critiques of work, intellectual sparring, whatever that is that we need something to push against, a goal to push back against. I really liked his bringing in the, and for a 95-year-old man, controlled rowdiness might be making a lap around the mall.
Yeah.
And then making that your goal. Well, I've never thought of things that way, but yeah, I think controlled rowdiness for some of the older guys in our church is the Thursday morning meeting that we have up here with our building committee, where they bring coffee and donuts, and I nearly every week have a video of one of them saying something just completely off the wall. This past week, this guy, he's 85 years old. He's one of my most favorite human beings in the world. He was talking to us about how if you see a woman who is a woman of some size, right, that you shouldn't say he's got a problem with the fact that people, are saying that they're thick or things like that. And he's like, that's not a term of endearment. You should say that she's pleasingly plump. It's horrible. It's the worst way to say that. And then the other guys, and my poor secretary all end up in this conversation with him about no, you can't say that. And it turns into this 4-on-1 argument, but that is, he loves it, and he does it every week. He will say something that he knows is going to turn the room against him in a way that's humorous, because that is for him a way to have that controlled rowdiness. And I think that's
what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's such an important thing. You do have a tendency to do that.
I love derailing you or getting you to. We have a picture that's my favorite one, where something off the wall happened, and I have a picture forever of you going like, "What are you doing?" It's my favorite picture of you.
I do remember that. I remember that very vividly.
So awesome.
That was really early on. I don't think we can tell part of the story. Really early on in our podcast experiments, when we were trying to figure out whether or not this actually had legs, and who knows whether or not it does still. But when we were trying to
get
what
kind of legs it has, maybe it's bionic, or
possibly like Darth Maul's
6 legs, like a spider, except that they're supposed to be 8,
like an insect. Insects have 6 legs.
I'm done derailing. Go ahead.
Okay, so we had a guest on who was supposed to talk to us about some of the sort of dark conspiracy theories that were going on, and they had decided they were a little nervous, and so they were going to they had opted to consume an adult beverage in order to loosen themselves up.
Brown water.
Yes. Yeah, brown water, as Mansfield
I think is what he
it.
said, right?
Yeah. And he did not stop at one Brown Waters. Yeah. He continued on with Brown Water by the time that when we started to discuss with him what our topics were going to be for that evening that we wanted to talk to this person about, they were off the rails already. And it was such an uncomfortable setting that we could not get that person off air without just completely it's a person that we're friends with, and so we didn't want to boot them and potentially ruin or damage a relationship. So for about 25 minutes we're having a very incoherent conversation, albeit looking back on it, it's funny now, 6 months removed from it. In the moment you were really upset
Yeah,
You were really
I was
frustrated.
mad, but
And
in retrospect,
I was cracking up.
Yeah, in retrospect, number one, that was very funny.
It was.
Number two, we now have content for our paywall for our subscribers.
Yeah,
so if you do want to
oh my
subscribe,
goodness, here we go with this again.
if you want to be a subscriber,
Yes.
go to our website, roll up a $1 bill, and
As you
shove
said
it into
in our most recent episode, Reverend and Rep.
Rev and Rep.com.
It is Rev and Rep.com, yeah.
Just roll up a $1 bill, whatever you want to give, and shove it in your USB drive.
And then that will get to us through the magic of the internet.
Yep.
Yeah, that is.
So that will get you past the paywall.
It's
and,
true.
And then you can see this video that we will never release.
Yeah, Danley is talking about true, noble, honest, masculine things right now when he's telling you
capitalism.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to pay for it if you want to see it.
I was referring more to the fact that you're lying to people and ruining their computers by telling them to shove it. Yeah. So by telling them to shove it, that'll just be an isolated thing.
Yeah.
Mansfield just had so many incredible things to say, and there's so much stuff that we didn't get to. We wanted to be respectful of his time. He's on the East Coast, so he's an hour ahead of us. He had another interview that was butted up right against ours, and so there were a couple of questions that we stopped short of asking intentionally because it was almost one of those things where I feel like he could have gotten through them because of how quick he talks and how fast that guy's brain works. But I don't know that we could have asked the questions in a coherent enough way trying to absorb all that extra information.
A little behind the scenes, we had worked on some questions ahead of time, and we had kind of whittled them down, and 14 minutes in, we were out.
Yeah, we were out. Of the 11 questions that we had prepared, gone. Already gone through. And so we...
He is a pro.
There's no two ways about it.
Yeah. And we are not.
we're getting closer. This was, I think, the most informationally intense interview we've had so far. I really found his, and as I always have, is not just a fan of his through his writing, but also his podcast. He really does seem to have a very down the middle approach whenever it comes to political things. And he was talking about Donald Trump, and I think that he went from a factual base instead of an opinion base with some of the things that Trump has done. But he also talks about how Trump got in his own way. Now, in his podcast, if you go back and listen to the 2016 as they're going through the Republican primaries, he is thinking that there's no way that Trump can win. He says
everybody thought that.
Well,
I did.
He says in
I was
in
like,
the
this is
beginning
a hilarious,
that that it's just a joke.
It's a hilarious hiccup in the middle of it.
Yeah, like, okay, whatever. And now he's talking about the very real possibility of a 2024 run if Trump doesn't do this, and that might become the new GOP standard. He also mentioned the danger of identity politics and where there's this sort of amoral or vastly different moralistic worldview in a lot of the things that are happening on the left. What I did find most interesting, though, was the way that he talked about the atheists in the Christian communities, the classic liberalists, and those who are more centralist politically that are religious people or Christians, that them working together is a positive thing from a political perspective, but how important it is that those Christians especially know what they believe, because there are a lot of atheists that are in the political sphere that understand why they're atheists. Now, Greg Kokel will tell you, we've talked a lot about the book Tactics before, the guy that coined the phrase like putting a rock in somebody's shoe whenever you're having a discussion with him, that there are a lot of people that would claim atheism but have no real idea what that means. They don't even know what classical atheism is. And so they claim to be atheists because they think that they don't believe in God, but they don't really know what they believe as atheists. And we have a lot of those same people in the Christian realm, but it just so happens that those people in the Christian realm tend to be a lot more politically active and motivated, and yet don't have a great fundamental foundation for Christian belief. And if I can plug something here from our church, we've got a great series right now that we're doing on fundamentals. It's a video series, as well as an in-person thing that we're doing where we're going over the fundamentals of faith so that we can create that basis, because we found the same thing just within the people in our church. And I just thought it was really interesting how he honed in on that particular piece, that it's not dangerous for them to work together for political means if the Christian knows what they believe and aren't going to be swayed by the argument of the atheist.
As long as they're grounded epistologically.
Yeah.
Which was the word he used. And I had to think about that. I was like, okay.
Yeah, you're breaking down the roots.
It means it.
What's the origin of the word, please?
It starts with the word "e," which means extra, and then pistological, which means there's a gun in there, so we got to be careful. I'm just playing around.
There's a lot of that we're seeing in not just modern Christianity, but in modern Western thought in general, is that I can claim to believe something, but that doesn't mean that I actually have to know what I believe. And he mentioned some philosophers and things like that, Socrates in particular, and Aristotle. When you look at the writings of Paul, when you look at the particularly the writings of Malachi in the Old Testament, that what you see happen in those situations is, or in those books, is you see Socratic dialect. You see where Aristotle's rhetoric and some of the scenarios that Aristotle had come up with are played out in Paul's writings, because there's things that were taught the same way that we would, discuss history. That's where, they were from a philosophical standpoint. Paul uses the rhetoric layout that Aristotle puts forth in order to create and make arguments throughout the Pauline epistles. And then again, we see the author of Hebrews, where he goes to great lengths to talk about something that was a sort of parable that was told by Aristotle and some of the philosophers, because those were the things that the people that were writing to readily had available to them. It was known knowledge at the time. And so we've seen this intersection before. I thought that was a really interesting thing as it came to not just political means, but in order to bring understanding, in order of furtherance of the gospel. But all of that hinged on the fact that the guys that were talking about it had this deep rootedness in what they actually believed. And though Paul never walked with Jesus, he wasn't one of Jesus' 12 disciples, he had this background in the law because he was a Pharisee. And then whenever he became a Christian, now he sees that Jesus was the fulfillment of all these messianic prophecies. And so he has this incredible legalistic and theological and intellectual view of what all of that is and how it works together. And so he's able to pull from both worlds. I think that that's not only a great thing that we have the opportunity to do now, but also that it is, like he said, it hinges purely on whether or not we are going to be able to stay rooted in our own belief system. And that's a really clear and present danger, I think, for the Christian today, especially as we are becoming more politically minded, or having to, I guess, succumb to some of the pressure of making our political beliefs known. And we find ourselves at this really dangerous crossroads. We have to make a decision. Are we going to, and I wanted to ask him, just for comedy's sake, who Jesus would have voted for. Mm-hmm. And maybe Jesus would have voted for Spike Jorgensen from the Libertarian Party. Who knows? Maybe Jesus would have written himself in.
I think Jesus, no, I'm not going to stop there.
Yeah. Jesus is the ultimate king.
I was going to say Kanye.
Yeah,
but
great.
I was like, yeah.
No. Jesus is the ultimate king, the ultimate authority.
Kanye's the only one that's got a not really a worship album, but a.
It is the new album very much leaned towards